2 years ago, my name was worth nothing. I know the exact day it stopped being worthless because I keep records, and the records are rather the whole point of me. A salt factor out of the Riverlands set his mark beside mine on an accord that season, on the strength of my seal alone. No Alpha's writ standing behind me, no pack name lending me its weight, just a wax circle pressed by my own ring, and a man deciding it was enough. That was the day Heartsmere stopped being a rumour people told over their ale, and started being a place you could find on a road. So when the boy came pelting up the granary stair, white to the lips, to tell me the Iron King's banner was on the Ford Road, I was at my long table with a pen in my hand and a queue of writs in front of me, and I did the only thing that felt true. I finished the line I was writing, then I set the pen down. Not because he had come, because I had reached the end of the sentence, and a sentence left half written is a debt, and I do not keep debts anymore. The boy was waiting for me to do something more dramatic. I was 8 and 20, a woman grown by any pack's law and by my own, and I had built every stone of the place he was standing in. And I think he expected the building of it to have made me larger somehow, wider in the shoulder, quicker to my feet. Instead, I capped the ink and brushed the grain dust off my sleeve and asked him whether anyone had thought to water the king's horses, because horses do not care whose they are, and a thirsty animal is a thirsty animal. He had not thought of it. Nobody ever does. I want to be honest about the next part, because the whole story turns on it, and I have told it wrong to myself more than once. When I came down into the yard and saw the Iron King of the Western Reach sitting his grey horse under my hawthorn, with 40 riders at his back, I did not feel my heart stop. I had imagined this, you understand. In the first months, when Heartsmere was 3 sod huts and a promise, I had lain awake building the scene, like a child building a fort. How he would come, how I would be magnificent, how he would understand at last exactly what he had thrown away. I had wrung that fantasy dry and thrown it out with the other things that did not pay rent. So when it actually happened, I felt almost nothing I could name. I noticed his horse was favouring its near fore. I noticed the bannerman's pole was set wrong. I noticed that Halvar, Alpha King of the Iron Territories, the strongest wolf drawing breath on this side of the mountains, had gone very still in his saddle. The way a man goes still when the floor he expected is not where his foot came down. He was looking at me as though I were a word he had spelled wrong his whole life and only just seen written correctly. I looked back at him the way I look at any traveller who arrives without sending word ahead, which is to say, without warmth, and with an account already running in my head of what his visit was going to cost me. "Warden," said the rider at his shoulder, when it became clear the king was not going to speak. A broad man, easy in his armour, his beater, I would learn, a fellow called Rowan, who had the good sense to look embarrassed. "We come under truce banner to treat with Heartsmere. The king may dismount," I said, "and his men may water their horses at the lower trough, and we will treat after the noon meal, because my people are at the noon meal, and I do not interrupt it for anyone, crowned or otherwise." I had already turned to go before I finished, which is a thing I had learned to do on purpose. Aback is a sentence too. There is bread. You are welcome to it, under truce. Mind the hawthorn. It is older than your throne, and we are fond of it. I heard, behind me, the particular silence of 40 men who have never once heard their king left standing in a yard. I did not hear him correct it. That was the first thing that did not fit. I filed it where I filed the things that do not fit, which is the same place I had filed, 2 years before, the sight of a man choosing another woman in front of his entire court, while his wolf looked at me the whole time, as though I were drowning and he could not swim. I had spent 2 years not looking in that drawer. I told myself I was not looking in it now. I was, of course. I'm only telling you what I told myself. He came to the granary loft after the meal, alone, which I had not expected and did not like. A king is easier to refuse with witnesses. Without them, he is just a large, tired man in your house. And large, tired men in my house are exactly the sort of thing I am soft about, which is a flaw I have learnt to ration. He stopped 2 paces inside the door and looked at the room. The long table, the writ queue, the shelves of ledgers running back 3 years deep, the seal press, the wax, the candle stubs. He looked at it the way other men had looked at it. A man counting, recalculating, understanding that the thing he had ridden 4 days to lean on was load-bearing. "You built this," he said, not a question. His voice did the thing it used to do, the thing I had spent 2 years training my body to forget. A low, even thing, like a hand laid flat on a table. "I keep building it," I said. "Sit if you mean to stay. You make the doorway look badly proportioned." He did not sit. He set one hand on the back of the chair I had offered him and did not pull it out. And I watched his fingers find the worn place on the top rail where my own hand goes 100 times a day. And I watched him notice he had found it. And I watched him not move his hand. I will tell you what he wanted, because he was a long time getting to it, and I am not, with you. He wanted my signature. The Western Reach was going to war, or near enough to make no difference. Jarl Voss, who held the 3 packs of the High Valleys, had spent 2 years swallowing his smaller neighbours and was now grown large enough to look hungrily west, at the iron territories, at the soft grain country the king's people depended on. And every road that grain came up, every cart of it, every spring drive of cattle and salt and iron ore, crossed one ford. My ford. The shallow, stony crossing of the grey water that I had bought with 2 years of my life, that sat on land no alpha had ever bothered to claim because it belonged to no pack and made no wolf strong, until a packless woman noticed that everything has to cross somewhere, and built her gate on the somewhere. He needed Hartsmere to hold the ford for the Iron Territories. He needed it sworn, sealed, signed. He needed my name on a writ. The man whose choosing had cost me my name now could not move his grain without it. If you have ever wondered whether the world has a sense of humour, I am here to tell you that it does, and that the joke is usually on you, and that it is sometimes worth laughing at anyway. "No," I said. He had been braced for a price. I watched him not understand a refusal that named no price. "Warden, Hartsmere is neutral," I said. "That is not a bargaining position. It is the entire town. Half my people came here because they belonged to no pack and wanted to belong to no pack. And the other half came because some alpha somewhere decided their lives were worth less than a treaty." I let that sit exactly as long as it deserved to. I do not sign my ford to 1 crown's war. The day I do, I am no longer the place people run to. I am only a smaller pack with a wall, waiting to be eaten by a larger one. You, of all men, should understand the arithmetic of being eaten. His jaw moved once before he found anything to put behind it. You, of all men. He said it back to me quietly, like a man testing whether a bone is broken. "You will make me say it then." "I will make you say nothing," I said. "I will make you drink your ale and ride home. Those are different requests, and I have only made the second one." I should tell you about the hawthorn now, because it matters later, and I would rather you have it. There is a hawthorn at the edge of my land, the one I told him to mind. And it stood there long before Hartsmere had a name. The first night I came to this crossing, with everything I owned in 2 saddlebags and not one soul who would have noticed if I drowned in the ford. I slept under it. In the morning, I cut a notch in its trunk to mark where my land would start. And over 2 years, that notch had healed into a pale seam, the shape of a closed eye. And I had got into the habit, walking the bounds, of laying my hand on it. People thought it was sentiment. It was account-keeping. It was me reminding myself of the size of the thing I had been when I started, so that I would not lie to myself about the size of the thing I had become. I am telling you this because when Jarl Voss arrived 3 days later, and he did arrive, with his own banner and his own truce that fooled no one, the first thing he did, before he had so much as asked for bread, was ride his horse up to my hawthorn and rest his gloved hand against the trunk in the exact place mine goes, and smile at me, to let me know he had been told what it meant, and that nothing of mine was private from him. I have met cruel men. Most of them are loud. Voss was the other kind, the kind that does small things precisely, so you will lie awake wondering how much he knows. He came, he said, to make Heartsmere an offer the Iron King could not. Where Halvar wanted my ford sworn to his war, Voss wanted only to recognise Heartsmere, formally, in front of witnesses, under the old border law, as a holding under his protection. A free town, he said, needs a friend with an army. He said the word friend, the way you would set down something you intended to pick back up later. And then, at the gathering I called that evening in the long hall, with my council and Halvar's men and Voss's, at the same trestle tables under the same rafters, he sprang the thing he had ridden 4 days to spring. And I will give him this, it was beautifully made. He stood, and he was courteous, and he produced a roll of vellum, and he reminded the hall, gently, as a man reminds children of a rule for their own good, that under the border law of the old accord, unclaimed marchland reverts to the nearest sworn jarl unless it is held under the writ of a recognised alpha. Heartsmere was marchland. Heartsmere held no alpha's writ. Its warden was packless, by her own loud preference. Therefore, Heartsmere, in law, in front of all these good people, was already his. He was not seizing anything. He was merely, regretfully, correcting a clerical oversight. He would, of course, honour my stewardship. He said steward the way he had said friend. The hall went very quiet. My council looked at me. I felt the 2 years under my feet tilt, because the worst thing about a beautiful trap is that part of you admires it even as it closes. If you have come this far with me, stay a little longer. What happens in the next hour is the part I have never been able to explain to my own satisfaction, and I have had a long time to try. Sit with me through it, and if this is the kind of story you would tell someone else, you know what the little bell beneath this does. Because I will tell you what happened next, and it was not me. It was Halvar. He rose from his place, and a king rising is a thing a hall feels in its floorboards, and he did not look at Voss. He looked at me, and then he looked at the vellum, and then he said, in that flat, low voice that needed no volume because no one in the history of his life had ever talked over it, "The writ exists." Voss's smile faltered, which I enjoyed more than I will admit. "My lord king, the marchland has no Heartsmere holds the writ of a recognised alpha." Halvar set his own hand flat on my long trestle, on the worn place, and I understood that he had found the worn place on every table in my life and meant to keep finding it. I granted it. 2 years passed. It is recorded in the iron rolls under the king's own hand. The warden of Heartsmere holds her ford by my writ and has since the season she raised her first wall. He let that land. Bring the rolls, Roan. Jarl Voss is welcome to read them. He will find the ink old. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie, because I had been there 2 years ago, in his court, the day my name was worth nothing. And there had been no writ. There had been a man choosing someone else, while his wolf wept at me across a crowded floor. It was a lie, and he told it without a flicker, in front of 40 of his own men who could have called it, and not one of them did. They closed around the lie like a fist. And I sat there in my own hall and watched the Iron King spend his honour. The one currency a king cannot mint more of, to buy back a town for a woman who had just refused him to his face. Voss left within the hour. He was still smiling. That was the part I did not like. I found Halvar afterward at the hawthorn, alone, looking at the pale, closed-eye seam in the bark and not touching it, which I noticed because Voss had touched it and he had not, and the difference between those two men was suddenly the whole world. There is no writ, I said. There will be by the time he sends a rider to check. He did not turn. I will sign it tonight, and a man will ride it back to the rolls, and the ink will be old enough to drink. It is a small forgery. I have done worse, for worse reasons. Why? He was quiet long enough that an owl said something in the dark and meant it. Because I will not watch it happen to you twice, he said. Once was past bearing, and I bore it because I had decided I had to. I find I have stopped being able to decide that. I should have asked him what he meant. I want you to know that I knew, even then, that I should have asked. Instead, I looked at his hand, hanging open at his side, a foot from the bark where mine had worn its place, and I thought about how a hand offered and not taken is a louder thing than a hand that grabs. And I said good night, and I went up to my loft, and I did not sleep. The thing he had been hiding, I found by accident, 2 days later, which is how the best-kept things are always found. Rowan brought me the writ to seal, the forged grant, ready for my ring, so that the lie would have my own wax behind it and be a lie we told together. I unrolled it on my long table to read it before I sealed it, because I read everything before I sign it. That habit is the most expensive lesson of my life, and I will not unlearn it for any king. And folded inside it, by mistake, in haste, in the dark, was another page, an older page, cut from the iron rolls themselves and never meant to leave them. It was the betrothal record from 2 years past, the official one, the lunar line, where a king's chosen mate is entered in his own hand before the pack and the moon. And there, on the line, was the name of Lady Audra of the High Valleys, Voss's daughter, the woman he had chosen in front of his court and me. But in the margin beside her name, small, in the king's own hand, not struck through, not blotted, kept, was mine, and beneath both names, in the same hand, a single line of accounting. The kind of note a man makes to himself so he will not be allowed to forget what a thing cost. V holds the Greywater villages, will burn them and her with them if I do not take the daughter. Choose the living over the chosen. I sat down in the floor of my own granary, which I had not done since the first winter, and I read it 4 times. He had not thrown me away. He had been held at the throat, with my whole village in his other hand. Voss had owned the country I came from, my mother's village, the people who had not noticed when I left because they were too busy staying alive under that man's boot. And Voss had made the king a sum. Take my daughter, ally your iron to my valleys, or I put the western Greywater to the torch, and the healer's girl your wolf keeps watching with it. And Halvar, who could not save everyone, had chosen to save the most people and lose the one. He had stood up in front of his court and broken his own wolf and let me believe he was a coward. Because a coward is survivable and a corpse is not. He had let me hate him for 2 years so that I would be alive to do it. He had kept my name in the margin the whole time. I want to tell you I went and found him and we sorted it out like reasonable people. We did not. I went and found him and I was furious, which surprised us both. I found him in the lower yard, checking his greys near 4, the one I had noticed favouring 4 days and a lifetime ago. And I put the page down on the rail in front of him without a word and watched his whole body understand what I had read. "You let me think," I said, and could not finish it, which is the truest sentence I have ever spoken, so I will leave it broken for you the way I left it for him. You were alive to think it. He did not reach for me. He gripped the rail instead, and his knuckles went white on the wood, and that was the closest the King of the Iron Territories came, in front of me, to coming apart. I made the arithmetic, and I would make it again. I would rather you alive and hating me on the far side of the mountains than safe in my hall as ash. I am not asking you to forgive the choosing. I am asking you to believe I never once unchose you. The bond does not let me. I stopped wanting it to. You married her. I signed a treaty, he said. There was no bond. You cannot complete what was never true. Audra knew it before I did. She has spent 2 years finding her own road out of her father's house, and she has nearly found it. The marriage is paper. You are the part that was real. He looked at the page on the rail, at my name in the margin, and something in his pride, the great cold breastplate of it, the thing his whole court had never once seen dented, buckled in front of me, quietly, like a roof under snow. I have ruled for 11 years, and I have never wanted anything I could not order brought to me. And then there was a woman in my healer's hall who set down a basin too carefully when I came in, the way a person does when they have decided not to bow, and my wolf has not had a quiet hour since. I do not know how to want a thing I cannot command. I am very bad at it. You have watched me be bad at it for 4 days. I had. I will not pretend the badness was not the most endearing thing I had ever witnessed. The strongest wolf alive, undone by a woman who would not water his horses without being asked. Voss did not wait for spring. He came for the ford on the dark of the next moon, the way men like him always come. Not in honest war, with banners, but quietly, with axes and pitch, to break the bridge timbers and burn my granary, and leave Hartsmere a smoking lesson to anyone else who thought a free town could stand. He thought the king's men were the threat. He had set his watchers on Halvar's camp. He had not set them on the granary loft, because who watches a clerk? I was awake. I am always awake. It is the other most expensive lesson of my life. I smelled the pitch before I heard the first axe, and I did the thing I had built 2 years of habit to do, which was not to run for the king, and not to scream, but to ring the deep bell I had hung in the loft for exactly this. The bell every soul in Hartsmere had drilled to. 3 strokes, the ford, to the ford, and then to take up the only weapon I have ever truly trusted, which was a lit lantern and the knowledge of my own ground in the dark. Here is the part I did, because the master of the story does not get to do all of it, and I will not let him. I knew the ford. I knew that the bridge timbers Voss meant to burn were green oak I had laid myself, and would not take a flame in under an hour. And I knew that the granary he meant to fire was stone-walled with a slate roof, and that the only thing in Heartsmere that would burn fast and bright and panic my people into the dark where his axes waited was the old hawthorn, dry-hearted, sap low, the one thing of mine he had made sure to touch so I would know he knew. He had told me, with that gloved hand, exactly where he meant to start. So I started there first. I went to my hawthorn ahead of his men in the dark with my lantern, and when his torchbearer came around the trunk expecting to find dry wood and a sleeping town, he found me, standing at the closed eye seam with my hand on it, and Heartsmere's bell already ringing the ford behind me, and every one of my people moving the right way, while his men stood in the wrong place, and the king's 40 riders coming up out of the willows where I had told Rowan, quietly, that afternoon, to put them. Because I read everything, and I had read Voss too. I took a wound for it. I will not make it more than it was. A torch came at me, and I put my arm up and got a long burn for my trouble, and gripped that torchbearer's wrist hard enough to take the brand the rest of the way out of his hand. And my palm bled where the iron band of it bit, and I bled on my own hawthorn, which felt, in the moment, less like injury than like signing something. And then Halvar was there. I have told you he is the strongest wolf alive, and I have shown you mostly his stillness, so I will only say this about the other thing. When he came through the dark and saw me bleeding against my tree, with Voss's man at my wrist, the king of the Iron Territories stopped being a man who chose the arithmetic. His control went, the way ice goes, all at once, with a sound. And what came up the yard after Voss's men was not a king making a calculated war, but a wolf that had spent 2 years holding a single thing too tightly to ever again let it be taken. His own men got out of the way. I am told they had never seen it. I had, once, across a crowded floor, weeping at me silently, while his mouth said another woman's name. This was the same thing. It had only learned, at last, how to move. Voss was taken at the ford, trying to cross it the honest way, when the dishonest way did not work. The crowd pleaser, if you want to call it that, and I have heard my people call it that around the fire, more times than is good for any of us, was not the fighting. It was after. It was Halvar, in the grey before dawn, with Voss kneeling in my yard, and the whole of Heartsmere and all 40 iron riders watching, choosing not to do the thing a king does to a man who tried to burn his country. He turned to my people instead, to mine. 2 years ago, he said, and his voice did not need the dawn to be quiet. I let this woman believe I was a coward, to keep this man from burning the village she came from. I told a lie in your hall 4 days past about a writ that did not exist. I will tell you the truth now, since I have ruined the habit of doing otherwise where she is concerned. He did not look at me to check whether I minded. He had stopped, I think, being able to perform anything. Heartsmere holds its ford by no king's writ. It holds it because she built it, and you keep it, and it was never marchland to be claimed. It was a place, made by a person, and the law that says otherwise is a law made by men like him and me. And it is wrong. I withdraw my claim. I withdraw my war from your gate. The grain will cross because Heartsmere chooses to let it cross, on Heartsmere's terms, or it will not cross at all, and my people will go hungry knowing the reason, and the reason will be just. I have signed a great many things. I have never heard a man unsign his own power in front of the people who give it to him. It is, it turns out, the most expensive forgery of all, and the only one that is not a lie. Voss was sent west in chains to answer to the smaller packs he had swallowed, who had a great deal to say to him and a great deal of time in which to say it. His daughter Audra signed her own name, at last, to her own road, and sent me a single line some months later that I have kept. I never wanted his hall. I am glad someone built a better one. I do not think we shall be friends. I think she is wrong about that, but I am in no hurry. The kiss, since you have been patient, and I know you are wondering, it happened at the Hawthorn, of course, in the grey morning, after the yard had emptied, and my arm was bound, and his hand was finally not hanging open a foot from the bark, but holding mine against the closed-eye seam where 2 years of my pride had worn a place. I will not describe it to you. I will only tell you that it felt like the end of a sentence I had been refusing to finish for 2 years, and that when it was done, I was not the size I had been when I started, and for once, I did not mind. A year on now, and I am writing this from the same long table in the same loft, and the writ that Halvar swore into the iron rolls is no longer a forgery, because we made it true the slow, honest way, with both our seals and a great deal of arguing in front of both our councils about whose name went first. Mine did. He insisted, which spoiled the argument entirely. He comes to Heartsmere more than a king ought, and he is still very bad at wanting a thing he cannot command, and I am still soft about large, tired men in my house in a way I have learnt to stop rationing. The grain crosses the ford on our terms. The packless still come up the road in 2s and 3s with everything they own in 2 bags, and I still meet them in the yard, without warmth and with an account already running. And then I give them bread, because someone gave me a hawthorn and a notch, and a chance to find out the size of what I could become. My name is worth a great deal now. There is a king who will tell you it was always worth everything, that he simply kept it in a margin for 2 years until I was ready to spend it. He is insufferable about this. I let him be, because it is true, and because a man who keeps your name, when keeping it could have killed you, has earned the right to be a little insufferable about having been right. Tell me, did you see it coming? The writ, the margin, the village? Or did you hate him a while too? I would like to know. Sit with me in the comments and say where you are listening from tonight, and what you would have done, standing at the hawthorn with the